Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Galloway and Isabel podcast. My name is Thomas Galloway. This podcast is brought to you by Morning Bell Coffee Roasters, and if you're watching on YouTube, that's great, but if you want to take this podcast on the go, you can check it out on the podcast app that comes with your iPhone or SoundCloud. So check for the links there. You can just listen to it. Otherwise, watch it on YouTube. That'd be awesome. But today I'm going to go through the best books that I read in July. I'm going to go through, starting with number 1 through number, I think I'm going to go through 7 or so books that really stuck out from this month. And let's get right to it. Number 1, American Psycho by Bret, Easton, Ellis. This book, I recommended on another podcast that we did. It is about a guy who works on Wall Street and is doing very well for himself. He's accomplishing quite a bit at a young age, but on his off time, and this isn't a spoiler, he is a serial killer. And this book was made into a movie starring Christian Bale in 2000. The book itself came out, I think, in the early 90s, maybe mid-90s, but it's narrated by the main character. And he is describing the different things he's doing, which makes it even more interesting. And one thing that was interesting comparing the book to the movie is that in the book, he definitely portrays himself in a better light compared to how the movie portrays him. And I didn't necessarily think about that as I was reading. But when I watched the movie, I realized, okay, the movie is making the assumption that this guy is not actually as charming as he seems that in the book, because he's describing himself. And the main difference that I saw is that in the book, the author, the narrator, acts as if women are really drawn to him until the second it's too late. But in the movie, it definitely implies that they find him kind of weird in general, and either because of the situation, they can't get out of there fast enough, but they're not necessarily drawn to him and then absolutely shocked as the book portrays. So that differentiating factor was interesting based on how the narrator portrays himself in the book and how the movie interprets that and changes it. One thing that was really stood out is how materialistic everybody in the book is, especially the main character. They are really concerned with the luxury brands of everything they're wearing, of the cars they drive, of the cars they're driven around in, and of the places they live. They're very concerned with it. There's one scene in the movie that they focus a lot on. It's not a big part of the book, but it really tells a lot in a situation where the main character and his friends on Wall Street are comparing business cards with each other, and the idea that someone can have a better business card than you was just like way too much for the main character. It overwhelmed him, this small little thing, but it was just so important to each of these guys that it seemed like an absolutely huge deal. And the movie does a really good job of highlighting that. So one thing that if you are interested in anything that's somewhat controversial or disruptive, this book and this author, Bret Easton Ellis, is really good. He is known for he's very notorious for basically trying to piss people off all the time. And his all of his books are like that. I have another one coming up on this list. But if you are interested in dark subjects and if you like a stream of consciousness style of writing, you will be into this book for sure. And if you haven't really read anything that's dark at all, give this book a shot, because if you do like it, it could open up a lot of other books for you. This is a good gateway into these type of books. So that's number 1, American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. Number 2 is Ties by Domenico, Starnone. And this book came out about 2015, I believe. It is a very short, very intense book about a marriage that has, as it's falling apart, and then after it's fallen apart. And there is some reconciliation, but it's definitely not what it was before. So the book is broken into 3 parts. It is based on this Italian couple, Italian author, and the 3 parts. First part is a series of letters from the wife to the husband who is off with his lover. And this is when they are in their mid-30s, and the husband has left the family, deserted the family, in his wife's words. And she is basically asking him how he could do this to them, how he could do this to his kids, who are in their about 9 to 13 range throughout these letters. So that's the first part, is those letters they're in their mid-30s, the husband and wife. And then part 2 is the husband, written by the husband in his 70s, looking back at his life, at their marriage, how it fell apart. He stumped, for a number of reasons that I'll let you read about, he comes across those letters again that his wife wrote to him that he's kept for some reason. And then he just looks back at everything, reflects, and so that part was really interesting as well. So that's when he and his wife are in their 70s. And so, as I mentioned, since he went off with his lover, they have reconciled and are making things work. It doesn't exactly say when he came back, but I think it was only like a period of about 4 years. And then finally, the third part is written by the daughter. She's in her 40s. It's still present day. And she reflects on her parents' struggles and how the marriage affected her and her brother. But like I said, this book is very short and intense and to the point. It's definitely not casting marriage in a positive light, but it's specific enough to these characters that you don't necessarily get the impression that this is the author's view on all marriages, but it doesn't exactly leave you particularly optimistic, let's put it that way. But it was a great book. Like I said, very short and to the point, and if that's your style, you're going to enjoy it. Number 3 on this list is Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain. And Anthony Bourdain is one of the heroes of the Galloway and Isabel podcast. We've talked about him quite a bit. All of us, he's one of our favorite people for a variety of different reasons. For Evan, he likes to travel and learn about different cultures and food and all that. So it was obviously pretty applicable to him, but I just really liked how he went about his show. And this is another thing we've talked about before. But I liked how he seemed to create the show he wanted to do and nothing more. He wasn't going out of his way to entertain you at all. He was doing exactly what he wanted, and you either liked it or you didn't. And I think that for anybody who's creating any kind of entertainment, that's the coolest way you can go about it. And this indifference to your audience's opinion is something I've tried to replicate in this podcast and in other stuff that I've done. And I think doing something like this and other solo podcasts I've done about books is something I know that not a lot of people are going to be particularly intrigued by, but it is just what I want to do. And so that is, I feel like people like Anthony Bourdain, Joe Rogan, people like that who have just done exactly what they wanted. It doesn't really seem like it might work, especially in Rogan's case, doing this super long one-on-one podcast. But I just really like that approach to creating a product. And I think you lose credibility if you are constantly adjusting your product to please your audience. And I think you get your real fans by just doing exactly what you want, and you keep them. And they will not become tired of what you do because they were drawn to it for its authenticity in the first place. Another thing I really liked about Bourdain, besides just being one of the coolest guys ever, was that he was very grateful and charming to his various hosts wherever he went, but he still could be a dick when he needed to be. And I think that is the best way to be, that balance that you have. And you could tell, like, he just gave out that vibe everywhere he went, and I think that's, like I said, the best way to be. So this book, that I was most happy about Bourdain. Kitchen Confidential, as far as I get the impression that propelled him to popularity early on and allowed him to do his shows. But it's basically about his journey through the food world in Manhattan and how he ran his different kitchens as a chef. And it's really interesting, fascinating book. One thing that really struck me now since he killed himself was the beginning of the book. He describes how he fell in love with food and how much pleasure he got in every single aspect of it. The food itself, the atmosphere, the people who created it, the people who prepared it for him, and how much enjoyment he got out of the whole process. And to read that, and that's right at the beginning of the first chapter, and to read that, looking back, knowing how his life ended, it's pretty striking and a little bit scary. That it could just go. That's how a path could be. It could start out like that, getting so much enjoyment out of all these things in this world, and then by the end of it, you don't want to be here anymore. It really was, like I said, really striking to start the book that way, and knowing being 2019. But like I said, I mean, he was one of the few, if only, celebrity figures that I felt like some sort of attachment to. Like, I really because he felt so genuine, you felt like you knew him, knew what he was about, knew his philosophies and principles on life. And reading this book was just really enjoyable to hear more about his story. So that was number 3, Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain. Number 4, Daily Rituals, How Artists Work. This book is by Mason Currey, and it is a book about the daily routines of novelists, painters, poets, other artists, and it's very quick on each artist. It is like probably one page, and they just go through, I don't know how many, it felt like there was probably 200 in that book, just a little bit about each artist. One thing that was really striking was how many of these artists woke up very early and did their work in the morning, and also how often they drank, drinking a lot throughout the day, or at least every evening. I assume that their schedules just were so inherently unstructured that that would lend itself to that pretty easily. But it was really interesting to see the different examples. Benjamin Franklin was obviously really into daily routines. If you've read anything about what he was interested in, he had very particular opinions on how daily routines should be structured. Ernest Hemingway, one of my heroes, he would wake up and write standing up for a few hours in the morning, and then he would stop and go out and do other stuff and allow the thoughts to store up in his head, and before he would then put them on paper the next day, the next morning. And I like that idea of allowing it to build up, allowing it to work out in your head, and then putting it down at some point, and having a regular routine to allow it to work in your head and then get it out and then do that cycle. So if you're interested in daily routines or you're trying to develop one for yourself, check out Daily Rituals by Mason Currey. And it looks like this podcast is not going to be a super long one. These books have been going through pretty quickly. The one thing that, with a couple of these being novels, there's less, whereas like a nonfiction book, I like to go through some of the facts about it. But these novels, I'd rather just give you a gist and then let you read it for yourself. So with this last month reading a lot more novels, this is going quite a bit faster. The next book, I think I'm on number 5. Yeah, number 5. Less Than Zero, another book by Bret, Easton, Ellis. This was his first book. He wrote it before his senior year in college, got published, and had actually reached a lot of people at that point. So basically, his senior year of college, he didn't really have to do anything. He knew he was set, but he still finished up. A movie came out based on this book that I haven't seen. I'm about to watch it, starring Robert Downey Jr., a young Robert Downey Jr. And this book is set in L.A. Most of the characters are visiting back during Christmas break, and everybody is high almost all the time, especially the main character. He's always very detached, unmotivated, apathetic. He is always being invited to do things. He doesn't really want to do it, but he does it anyway. He's just kind of along for the ride. And a lot of these characters are very similar in that way. And it was really interesting to read this book and Bret Easton Ellis, just everything he does is enjoyable. And I'm definitely going to read some more books by him. So if if you read American Psycho and like it, definitely check this out. Maybe you read this one first. It's a little shorter. And then if you like it, you can move on to American Psycho. But I would definitely recommend his books. Okay, the next book, number 6, The Algebra of Happiness by Scott Galloway, the professor of marketing at NYU. He wrote the book The Four, which is about Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Google, which was the number 1 book, I believe, on my May Books podcast. This book, bad title, great book. The Algebra of Happiness. I don't like that phrase or that name at all. I think it's really misleading. I think that, and this is something I've thought about for a while, especially in back to Bourdain, is like the idea that people come up with these like formulas for happiness, and maybe that's not what he means by this name, but it certainly seems like that. Like there is this formula that guarantees happiness, and there's literally a formula on the book, on the title of the cover of the book. And with Bourdain, I remember in a number of interviews he was talking about how people would have no sympathy for him if he said he wasn't happy or at all, because like he has this, basically, if you ask someone, could you be sad if you had his life, traveling around, visiting different places, meeting a bunch of different people, and that was your life, everyone would be like, of course I'd be happy. And for him, being in that situation where everybody thinks you should be happy and not being happy, I don't know the exact details, but certainly not being perfectly content, it seems, that would make it feel probably even worse when everybody anticipates that you'd be perfectly satisfied. And so to me, the idea of this formula for happiness is pretty ridiculous. And the algebra of happiness, to me, implies that way too much. But other than that, it was a great book. In the book, there really isn't any of this formula or algebra talk. I think it's just the title they came up with. But it's really good. The one thing that separates itself from other books that would be similar to this, it's way shorter and more concise, and doesn't feel like you're wasting a lot of time. It feels like he did the exact minimal amount of words to get his points across, and that was great. It was very to the point. And it also differentiates itself another way because it goes against the work-life balance idea to a certain extent. He's very much this guy that says work-life balance, especially in your 20s, if you're trying to move up to the top, is very, very difficult, maybe impossible. So you should, if you really are ambitious, basically be like, okay, I'm probably not going to have any kind of balance in my 20s. I'm just going to work super, super hard and then try to develop that as I get older and as I start a family and all that. So that, I think, if you're someone who is very ambitious and you're very occupation-oriented, this would be a good book because it's going to be more directed at you. Number 7 on this list, yes, number 7 on the list, Fire in the Hole by Elmore Leonard. This book is a short story. The show Justified is based on this short story. I've seen part of that show. It's very good. And he also wrote the book that my favorite movie was based on, Out of Sight. And he, great author, great short story. I don't have a whole lot to say about this, but if you've seen the show Justified, you might as well read the short story that it was based on. We don't have a whole lot to say about that book, or for the next book either, which is our last one, number 8, The Rule of Law by Tom Bingham. This book is basically a great book for incoming law students, and I read it this summer just to get a little prep a little bit. I didn't want to do it too much. I'm going to get plenty of that type of education coming up here pretty soon. But it was good to get a little prep work there, and I don't think that's going to be a mass appealing book. But if you're interested in anything, a very brief introduction to law, check out The Rule of Law by Tom Bingham. And that's all I've got. Those are the top 8 books. I read maybe 10 books this month. A couple of them I didn't really feel like talking about. Even the last couple here I've went through pretty quickly. And I don't know if I'll be doing any more of these next month and go beyond that. I probably won't have as much time to read. So this could be it. But yeah, check out some of these books. There's a pretty wide variety here. And I think that's all I got. So for Thomas Galloway, everyone, have a great day.